any ministry that is effectively addressing the question of what it means to be human, those are the ministries that are going to be not just relevant, but transformative in culture today.
What I've seen is that progressivism puts self above everything. Really, self becomes our idol, self becomes our God.
What would economics look like if we put them before us? What would our national debt look like if we put them before us? What would immigration policy look like if we put children before adults? What would policing look like if we put children before adults? What would we do in the realm of digital technology or pornography if we put children before adults?
And what you're talking about really, and again, common sense stuff, is going to the root issue.
If you cannot defend right to life, nothing else matters.
It is undeniable that statistically, that is the greatest risk for kids.
What does it mean to be human? That is where the cultural battle rages today.
I didn't even really know much about IVF. If we believe that life begins at conception, then what the ramifications are for these embryos that are not being utilized or are being dumped in the garbage.
The vast majority of children that are made in vitro, through IVF, that are created in glass, are going to be discarded. And then the ones that are desirable, the right sex, that don't have any genetic abnormalities, that are not implanted, are going to be frozen. And if you go into a freezer, you very often never come out again.
We either wind up being the abuser of children or passive in allowing crap to happen.
It's probably around 2 to 3% of babies that start in the petri dish that are going to be born alive.
It doesn't take long for our emotions to get involved in something where we begin to compromise, because what we thought we were anchored to, actually we weren't anchored all that well. It was just not inconvenient.
So we have a challenge to walk with our friends. It can never be above the truth.
Well, hey friends, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you've found us through Love and Truth Network or through Transforming Congregations, we're just grateful that you're here, and also really grateful to kind of do a reprise of another podcast that we did with Katy Faust about a year ago or so. Katy, we're big Katy Faust fans here in our home, including our boys too. They've read her books, and we just love really the work that she's doing and the clarity with which she speaks, the passion that God has given her as well. And so I'm excited to have her with us again, and for you to be able to tune in and listen or watch this podcast. So Katy, thanks for being with us again.
Well, I'm big Garry fans in addition to Melissa fans, and I got to meet your boys, and so now I'm fans of them as well. So it's a joy to be with you again. And I really appreciate your work. If we're going to do any kind of cultural transformation, we have got to tend to the victims of the sexual revolution and the victims of family breakdown. And you guys are kind of at the intersection of that. So I'm just grateful that you're offering pathways of healing to so many people who are in need of it.
I appreciate that. And also, I just want to say, really, our ministries, I think that so many people can see those as what we're doing as kind of fringe. Like, we're dealing with some tiny percentage of the population. The truth is, this messaging comes all the way back, whether it's sexual brokenness, whether it's the desperation that people feel around the longing for a child that they haven't yet been able to have, or whatever those issues are, or if it's the children who are, you've expressed in some of your books, some of the kids that are the byproduct of some of these things, and they're wrestling with this disconnection that they don't know how to be able to fully verbalize or how to work through fully or what have you. But so a couple of things. One is, I'm grateful for the power of the cross to bridge the gap and to bring a kind of healing that is beyond our ability to just kind of logic or intuit. So grateful for that. But also, the truth is, our ministries are really touching, by extension, and like dropping a pebble into a pool of water, the ripple effects that go out from that. Really, these are not fringe ministries. These are connecting, because they're connected to relational brokenness. We really connect ultimately to the heart and to the things that feed into a lot of other expressions that lead toward bondage, that lead toward misery, that lead toward a lack of human thriving. We want to see true human thriving by coming under the design that God created us for and living out his design and purposes for kingdom purposes ultimately. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Just to reinforce what you're saying, where is the truth of scripture crashing against the shores of culture these days? It is not necessarily around the question of what is the nature of God. It is not, like it was in the first couple centuries. It's not necessarily the question of what is the nature of salvation as it was during the Reformation. I mean, these were situations where, you had people being put to death and schisms within, the church community or the Christian community or whatever. So those have largely been put to rest, and they still matter, but they are not the place where we are seeing the cultural friction happen. Where is that happening today? It is on the question of what does it mean to be human? That is where the cultural battle rages today. You and your ministry are answering one critical aspect of what does it mean to be human? What does the nature of our bodies say about the orientation of our sexual drives and choices? I am responding to what does the nature of man have to say about who children are, how they come to be, and by extension, to what they have a right and what are their needs. And so any ministry that is effectively addressing the question of what it means to be human, especially as it intersects with the pain that people have experienced because other sources have gotten that wrong, those are the ministries that are going to be not just relevant, but transformative in culture today.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you and I talked about in the last podcast, I know that you had some material that was just about hot off the press or pretty much going to be released very soon within a few months, that would be a curriculum for churches. And you've had another book come out, maybe even two. So just tell us a little bit about what's going on with you and the ministry, doors that are opening up for you, those kinds of things.
Yeah, we had an explosive year in 2024. We went from a staff of 2 in 2023 to a staff of 5 last year. They do the work of, I often say they do the work of 10. We had incredible expansion of our projects. We published guidelines for corporations that want to use their influence in the HR realm to protect children rather than victimize them. So you can go to our website, look at resources for corporations, for companies, and we will tell you, hey, if you want to be a child-centric company and provide great benefits to your employees, here's the things that your medical benefits should include, and here's the things that you need to exclude because they are going to victimize rather than protect kids. So that was one sort of product that we offered last year. The other one was a video curriculum that in essence takes our them before us principles and issues. That is children's right to their mother and father, by extension, what that looks like in conversations about marriage, divorce, modern families, reproductive technologies, IVF, surrogacy, adoption, polygamy, cohabitation, etc., layers over the top of it biblical truth, and then offers sort of a shepherding component of, okay, well, I understand and I agree, but what do I do about the lesbians next door raising the 7-year-old boy, right? So that resource is now available. If you go to our website, thembeforeus.com, resources for churches, you can get it for free. There's no prep. There's no homework. You just start the video and we've got like participant guides all ready for you. There is no excuse. No excuse not to get in and become an expert on all these issues that are fundamentally connected to child well-being and child protection. We also, amazingly, were invited to start a radio program on the second largest Christian broadcaster in the nation, American Family Radio. So we now have a weekend program, a 1-hour weekend program that takes biblical truths, trending news, current studies, and questions and answers. And the whole point of that hour is to teach you to start thinking about the world through the put them before us, put children before adults lens. So that is also available. We published, as you mentioned, a book called Pro-Child Politics, which applies our them before us framework that we typically have used on every major marriage and family issue to every cultural, economic, and national issue. So what would economics look like if we put them before us? What would our national debt look like if we put them before us? What would immigration policy look like if we put children before adults? What would policing look like if we put children before adults? What would we do in the realm of digital technology or pornography if we put children before adults? So I conscripted 19 subject matter experts, from Billboard Chris on the transgender topic to Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, on education, to Abby Johnson on the issue of life. All of these different experts to just give me 3,000 words on things that they've often spent decades working on, like Grover Norquist on taxes, and say, show me what this looks like if we put children first. So that's an incredible resource, Pro-Child Politics, on just how do we start thinking about everything through the lens of prioritizing the most vulnerable. And as Molly Hemingway notes in her blurb at the beginning, a crazy thing happens when you prioritize the next generation. You get genuine, true, effective, concentrated conservative policy. There's something about progressivism that elevates self above kids. And there's something about true conservatism that's always going to protect kids or the next generation before the current urgent, tyrannical, supposed wants or needs of the current generation. So there was a lot happening last year. And I'm really, really proud of my team for making it all possible on such a tight timeline. And, you know, this is in the midst of publishing and speaking and interviewing on over 100 different platforms. So, you know, we broke a couple stories on, you know, terrible legislation that was happening across the country, testified against several horrifying bills, defeated a couple of them. So there's just a lot happening. Last year, there was a lot happening in the then before us world. And I'll stop there before I get on to highlights for 2025.
That's exciting. I want to hear more about that. But you mentioned the idea, rightly so, that progressivism tends to put self over children. But that is certainly true. But I would also say what I've seen is that progressivism puts self above everything. Really, self becomes our idol. Self becomes our God. And so everything becomes subservient to that. And of course, children are the most vulnerable and the most innocent that are the most deeply impacted by that. You know, as you were talking, there's been this thing that's been, you know, needling me for a number of months. And I think you're the perfect person to ask this question of. And this is coming out of, we haven't, by the way, for those listening and watching, there's no topics that we've talked about that we're really addressing. This is just kind of an open discussion. But I would love your thoughts, Katy, on this. I have, as somebody who advocates for and is a big believer in life and wanting people to choose life and supporting that idea, but not just supporting life, but also wanting the church and others to support the women who are making hard decisions and the dads who also desire life, supporting the whole person, the whole group. What I oftentimes get back from people that I've known for a long time. Sometimes they've been personal friends. They're in the Christian space. They're even, and sometimes Christian leaders. And I will on occasion get feedback that's really snarky and really kind of ugly about kind of barking about, oh, conservatives, all you ever care about is the baby in the womb. But there's all of these other issues, poverty and gun violence and you know, all of these things. And I don't know why we can't have a perspective of a both and when it comes to trying to come up with ways of really producing human thriving. But of course, on some of these issues, we have very different perspectives of what that looks like. However, I do feel like there's something being lost in that broader discussion about the nature of how impossible it is for a child in the womb to do anything. Obviously, there's nothing they can do for themselves to protect themselves, but I feel like the kind of the snark and the finger wagging is being directed that you care more about them than you care about the adult who is struggling with poverty. And again, I think we can care about all of that and try to make steps to improve lives and those kinds of things. But I do think the numbers, the magnitude of the numbers, and then the magnitude of the inability for that little one to do anything for themselves calls us to a particular care that rises above, to me, a little bit from the other perspectives. I'm not saying that great, but what is your thought about that?
I'm going to list several, I'm going to just spray you with bullet point ideas of everything that you just said, not in any particular order. Number one, I do care about the baby more than I care about the adult. The baby is absolutely defenseless. They have primary natural rights. They are unable to advocate for themselves or speak up for themselves or defend themselves. The only people that can do that are adults. The adult that is living in poverty, even though they might have gone through difficult circumstances, is there partially or fully because of their own volition and choices. And so there is a different burden of responsibility on those two cases. And I'm not saying you cannot help the adults, but I will say the best way to help people that become adults in difficult situations is to defend children's fundamental right to life and right to their mother and father. Number two, I will say that I think that there has been a bit of a growing course, especially in sort of the progressive Christian circles, saying, well, we need to be not just pro-life, not just anti-abortion, but holistically pro-life. And then they sort of move in a lot of progressive policies that have to do with immigration or welfare or whatever. Oh, you can't really be pro-life unless you also do all these things. And I'd say, no, that's not, it is okay to say we will staunchly stand upon and defend children's fundamental right to life. And in my world, that means standing against the baby taking industry of abortion and challenging the baby making industry of IVF, which destroys maybe 4 times the amount of embryonic life every year than Planned Parenthood does. And so for me, it is not only okay, but it is good to have a very singular focus on defending children's primary right and not allow it to be diluted into all of these other progressive causes that kind of matter, but are going to suck the potency out of that, that cause of, if you cannot fundamentally defend children's right to life when they are the most helpless, do you think that you are going to be able to be effective in any of those other cases? Number 3, if we really do care about adults, especially adults living in poverty, we will defend children's right to their mother and father. Children who grow up in the home of their married mother and father are 4 times less likely to live in poverty. They are 3 to 4 times less likely to be subject to abuse. They're more likely to graduate from high school, not be homeless, not have a teen pregnancy, not be incarcerated. Brad Wilcox, did a study that said children who grow up without their father in the home are more likely to go to college, more likely to go to prison than graduate from college. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you don't have a dad, you're statistically more likely to be imprisoned than graduate college. Like, if we really want adults to thrive, we fix the family. There's no other way to do it. You want to talk about adults living in poverty? We actually have a literal recipe to ensure that they don't. It is called the success sequence. Number 1, graduate high school. Number 2, get married. Number 3, have a child. And it must be in that order. And if you do that, all of which have to do with adult volition, adult choices, adult responsibility, if you take responsibility for yourself and you graduate high school, get married, and then have kids, only about 2.5% of adults will live in poverty if they follow the success sequence. So, and then the children born of that union are also going to be exempt from a lot of the other social issues that we're battling back or kind of framing as squishy pro-life adjacent causes. And finally, I will say something scorching that I was really angry about. You only care about kids in the womb, blah, blah, blah. Christians out-adopt the general public 2 to 1. We are actually, and it's not just the white drug-free infants. When I was on my adoption trip to China, 14 of the 17 adults who were there adopting older special needs children who had largely been forsaken were Christians. So I hear that kind of thing and I'm like, well, how about screw you, you idiot? I mean, it's very obvious that to me, those are objections that are really just, they're not grounded in reality. They are there to deplatform sort of the power of this argument, and it's not substantiated, I would say, in any other area. Fight for children's right to life. Next, fight for their right to their mother and father. And we aren't going to be dealing with swelling populations in prisons or foster kids or poverty rates. I mean, in our first book, Then Before Us, we talk about how all of the rise of poverty over the last 40 years has tracked with the increase in single motherhood. If you want to fight poverty, you can't throw enough money at the problem. You have to fix the family. So I don't have I can answer those questions, but especially if they come from Christians, I don't have a lot of patience for it.
Well, and I'm hearing that more, both to me directly, but then I'm seeing more of that kind of stuff, nonsense that's being promoted. And what you're talking about really, and again, common sense stuff is going to the root issue and dealing with it so that the product, the fruit of addressing these things is going to over time improved greatly every one of these issues that people are pointing to. So yeah, and it does convolute. I heard someone, a woman, I can't remember what her name is now, but it's a leader. It's not Lila Rose, it's somebody else, but a leader in the pro-life movement. When she was being accused of something like what I brought up earlier, she's like, look, I focus on life issues. I focus on the issue of reducing abortions and that kind of thing, because you could be asking me, why am I not trying to save lives that somebody who has a tumor or cancer issues? I can't possibly do that and this and all the other areas that affect life.
Right.
I'm focused here because this is where God's called me. So I think again, those are important.
It's like saying, look, I'm fighting for cancer awareness, and someone says, well, why aren't you fighting, against diabetes too, and against multiple sclerosis? No, there's room for people to advocate on those causes, but you can't, that whole if everything is a right, well. If everyone's a super, then nobody's super, kind of quoting Mr. Incredible, or his kid, actually, when everything has equal amount of importance, then nothing is important. So I really do believe that there is a hierarchy of priorities, especially when it comes to defense of the most vulnerable. If you cannot defend right to life, nothing else matters. Once you've defended right to life, you must defend right to mother and father. Otherwise, nothing else matters. So there's a hierarchy, I think, of needs, and when it terms to in terms of causes that need to be confronted.
Well, and also, again, I'm so glad to be talking with you about these topics today. But also, there's nobody else that I'd rather ask this question of. The issues going on in the UK that have been exposed over the last month or two in terms of decades. And I don't even know if if the listeners or viewers, some of them certainly are going to know what I'm talking about, but the decades of grooming gangs of these young guys, whatever, men who are working together to take teenage girls, 13, 14-year-old girls, and bring them in through manipulation and other means, bring them into this situation where these girls are being raped repeatedly, gang raped even, and the UK is turning a blind eye in leadership, turning a blind eye to it. The police, I heard of one account where the police were called because a neighbor or somebody, there was a commotion, the neighbors called, they showed up, that there were, I think there were either 5 or 7 men in a room where there were 2 13-year-old naked girls who were drunk. The police came in and arrested the girls and said nothing to the men about anything that was going on. I mean, it is insane when you look at some of the transcripts of what these poor girls have experienced. And it is absolutely unconscionable that we live in and I mean, we have all kinds of crap going on here too, in terms of pedophilia and all that stuff as well, at levels we can't even imagine, I believe. But what are your thoughts about this being exposed? And have you tracked this much yourself?
I was aware of the Rotherham. There's been a couple major cities that exposed this as much as 10 years ago. And so I've been aware of the grooming gangs. They're really rape gangs. That's what they are. And it's been mentioned among those of us that are concerned about child welfare, but it really wasn't until Elon Musk started to explode this story. There were some transcripts that finally came out that people could read for themselves. And it's horrifying. I mean, some of these girls were threatened with their lives. Some of them were burned alive. Many of them were killed. Their parents were killed. I mean, it's a criminal gang is what it is. And the scandal is one part that this was taking place on an organized scale in a variety of different cities across the UK. But the second scandal is police, social workers, teachers, a lot of people were aware and they did nothing. And sometimes there was an active cover-up. There were a few whistleblowers, and then sometimes the whistleblowers were targeted or demoted or lost their jobs or whatever. And so when we talk about the United States and sort of our God, the God of self, and I would say the God of sexual self, to which everything else must bow and sacrifice, the UK has a God, and it is diversity is our strength. And so this idea of identifying not just that there were these grooming gangs, but they were disproportionately, almost exclusively Pakistani men who were targeting not just any girls, but white girls, that was something that could not be spoken because it compromised their God, their mantra that diversity is our strength. And you cannot challenge that. And this challenged it in a way that nothing else could. It was the absolute reversal of the supposed narrative that the whites are oppressors, that UK are the colonizers. And it was very, very clear that it was not young brown girls that were being targeted. It was young white girls. And I would say, not coincidentally, who were from families that often experience breakdown and father loss, right? Children who don't have their dads in their home are distinctly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, and they knew how to find these girls. So there's a racial component to it. There's obviously a sexual exploitation component to it, but probably one of the most horrifying things is there's a cover-up to it as well. And of course, the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was the head of the branch of the UK government that was responsible for like overseeing these kinds of criminal cases. So their most recent rejection of having a national inquiry certainly it's fueled a lot of suspicion among my friends in the UK of like, oh, why would you not want an inquiry here, Keir Starmer? Is it because you will be complicit in this terrible cover-up? So it's great that this is getting attention. What's horrible is that it's been going on for decades. It's probably still going on now. A couple of the places with the most dense populations of Pakistani men have not even been investigated. So it looks like this is very systematic, coordinated. It's been replicated, and it's been enabled by feckless, spineless social workers and police bureaus who have preferred their own comfort over the well-being of children, and these girls have paid an absolute horrifying price.
And when you say, Katy, spineless, feckless, the next word I want to use is men. And I realize that women played a role in this as well. But when it comes to the ministry that we're operating, one of the key foundational or pillars, I guess, of our ministry is based in Genesis 1:26 and 27, which is about God making us male and female in his image. And so that we are distinctly different, but of equal value. We bear different aspects of the image of God as male and female. And one of the roles of a man, of a father, is to protect, is to cover, is to provide, is to take a good initiative, and that has not been where men have just either they're the abusers, as has been pointed out, or so in our masculinity we tend either, rather than being salient, rather than being strong in a godly biblical way, we either wind up being the abuser of women and children or passive in allowing crap to happen. And so, that also is, I think, is greatly underscored in the garbage that's been allowed in the UK. But then I'm also, as I think about that, and I'm horrified by that, I'm also thinking about, again, what is happening in our country and in regard to obviously abortion and those kinds of things. But in addition to that, like what is happening, and I mentioned it earlier, but even on the issue of pedophilia and those in high places in our country, which again, we don't know all the details of that. I think there's going to be probably some stuff that winds up coming to the surface. The truth ultimately does rise to the surface, even when it takes a long time, like we're seeing in the UK. But are you, in connection to your ministry and even the issue, or your organization and the issue of sexual exploitation or pedophilia, those kinds of things, are there some things brewing here in the U.S. that our viewers, listeners may not necessarily know about, that you're seeing or that you have huge concerns about?
Well, I think that obviously you've got some more sensational stories, like you've got like P. Diddy being exposed for pedophilia, rape cells in Hollywood, and that gets a lot of attention. But actually, the areas where children are most at risk are things that we've sort of taken for granted. And I would say that would be like modern families. And I'm not saying, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, we know the places where children tend to be the safest, and that is the home of their married biological mother and father. We know the situations where they tend to be the most in danger, and that is cared for by unrelated adults. Now, this is the exact reason why adoptive parents like me and a lot of your listeners had to undergo screening, vetting, background checks, fingerprints for months or years, because it is so well known that unrelated adults left to care for children on their own are risky to kids. So what we're doing now is an absolute overhaul of marriage and family in ways that will swap out biological parents who are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of kids, and swap in adults who are statistically not just who escalate risks of abuse, but are the most likely to perpetrate abuse. And you can see this, thank God. And I'm not saying all stepfathers or all boyfriends are abusive, but, I often tell people, like, pause this podcast right now and Google the words mother's boyfriend.
Yeah.
Pause it. I'm not kidding. Pause the podcast and look at it. Now, come back and tell me, how'd that go for you? What you saw was unlimited returns of headlines of the most horrific cases of child abuse, sexual abuse, torture, infanticide that you've ever seen on the internet. That's because an unrelated cohabiting man is statistically the most dangerous person in a child's life. And so while you can see these sort of scandals brewing in terms of headlines, what's going on right now in terms of us forsaking the true definition of marriage, and as a result, creating all of these different forms of family that are going to include unrelated adults for children, things like the promotion of open non-monogamy or polygamy, cohabitation instead of marriage. And cohabitation is statistically unstable, much more likely to break up. And then the child's own mother or father is much more likely to start cohabiting with people who are going to introduce those new kinds of risks to kids. And so I am concerned about sexual abuse for kids, but the staging ground for where that fight needs to begin is the definition of marriage. That is where it needs to begin. Right,
exactly. And as you just said, no one is saying that every single, stepfather, boyfriend, whatever is going, but it is undeniable that statistically that is the greatest risk for kids. So in terms of whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse or neglect or whatever, those things all add up to be astronomical, in the life of children in general. So go ahead.
Well, even if it's not direct abuse, children who are living with an unrelated adult, a stepmother or a stepfather or a live-in girlfriend or boyfriend, they're just more likely to have more accidents. They're more likely to die by accident or be injured by accident. Why? The unrelated adult just isn't as attentive, right? They don't have as much of an invested interest in protecting the child and keeping an eye on them. And so even if it's not like targeted abuse, there is some level of awareness that a biological parent brings to the home of that child that safeguards them in ways that we have yet to really even fully understand. So I just think you start messing with the building blocks of a child's life, you're going to mess with their entire future as well.
So I would love to kind of flip the coin for a moment, and we're talking about the potential harms, and then and then there's the value. Of course, the greatest environment for children, statistically speaking, to grow up in is with mom and dad, biological mom and dad, being married in their home. So we've talked about some of the horrible things that can happen when that doesn't occur. And obviously, even when that happens, sometimes horrible things do happen. But flip it around for a minute and talk, Katy, about and I think, your family, your family actually, I think, accentuates this and highlights this. We try in our family to do the same. I know that many people who are listening would hope that their family would do the same. But let's talk a little bit about the positive aspects. What does a dad who cares about the spiritual, emotional health of their children and growing them up in that place, a mom and a dad, and I'm saying a dad in particular because so often dads can kind of be just left out of the equation beyond maybe being the primary breadwinner or whatever. And even that can be kind of a dirty idea. But what do moms and dads bring in a positive way when they are doing more than simply staying together, but they are really focusing on putting their children first and nurturing them in the admonition of the Lord, as Proverbs talks about?
Well, let me just talk about it from a developmental perspective, because you probably could do a great job of talking about it from a spiritual perspective. So Erica Komisar, who I think is kind of the national expert on mothering and motherhood and the distinctive of mothers, often talks about how moms respond to babies' distress in ways that dads simply don't. So when babies are first born, well, and all through their infancy, she would say they don't really have, what we would consider to be a fully formed central nervous system. So they are not able to regulate their own emotions. They're even not able to regulate their own body temperature in some way. They need mom to regulate them. So what happens when a baby is cold, hungry, tired, afraid? Cortisol levels go up. The baby starts crying. They are in distress. The heart races, okay? Babies are unable to lower their own cortisol levels. The only thing that drops babies' cortisol levels is increasing oxytocin, but babies can't increase their own oxytocin. The only way oxytocin rises in a baby is through skin-to-skin contact. Now, anybody can put a baby on their chest, but dads and strangers don't respond to babies' cries of distress as frequently or as quickly as mothers do. There's something in the mother's brain that simply says, give me that baby. I need that. I've got to soothe the child. Okay. And this happens to me. I live across the street from a pool, and in the summer when the doors are open, I can hear all the kids, and it's awesome. Sometimes there's a baby crying, and I'm like, get the baby. Somebody get the baby. I mean, it pains me to hear the baby crying. Whereas all the other men in the world are just kind of walking around and it's all right. Someone's going to get the baby's fine, I'm sure. There's something about mothers that respond to infant distress in ways that means that their oxytocin release is going to happen dozens of times throughout the day, as opposed to dads who obviously connected dads are incredible and they love their kids and they want to go. But when you see dads interacting with infants, it's a lot less soothing, bouncing, rocking, wrapping, wearing, kissing, putting the breastfeeding. Dad interaction with kids tends to be tossing, swinging, jostling, which is all really, really important. It teaches babies something else about life. But the bottom line is that mothers are wired to soothe babies in a way that helps them develop their own emotional regulation. And babies can't soothe themselves until 6, 9, maybe 12 months old. They need moms to do that for them. Now, you see all of these influencer men who are acquiring surrogate-born babies, and they probably should. I mean, I think I've heard Erica say they're probably going to need to sniff oxytocin so they can, even if they're not a woman, they act like women. Babies, if they don't have a mother, they need somebody that will at least act like mothers, and men don't. By nature, they don't. It doesn't matter if they're effeminate or like to cook or paint their nails. They will not be mothers to the baby. Babies need mothers. Also, mothers accentuate attachment, which is so critical for children. I mean, adoptive parents like me, whose children didn't have a primary caregiver for the first couple of years of their life, they see the harms, the dysregulation that comes from insufficient or non-existent attachment in children, and how it can take years to overcome or maybe never be overcome if you miss those critical windows. Moms attach with babies in ways, especially if it's the birth mother and it's continued attachment from those 9.5 months of gestation. Dads promote separation. Yeah. And even in the way that I was talking about their interaction with babies under the age of 12, moms attach by strapping children to them with all different kinds of $100 strips of fabric. And dads promote independence, right? Detachment by the way that they play. Moms talk to kids differently. They tend to simplify their words right down to the child's level by saying things like, oh, baby has a boo-boo, right? Dads talk to their kids like they talk to everybody else. They're like, you got a gnarly rugrats, bro. I mean, dads are cognitively expanding their kids by using word choices that they use with adults. Dads play with kids differently than moms do. Moms don't actually play with kids a lot. They care for kids. Dads play with kids, especially jostling, roughhousing, wrestling. The interactions that mom has with kids naturally develops their fine motor skills. So think about the kinds of activities that kids are doing with their moms: coloring, cutting, tying, maybe chopping vegetables next to her. Think about the activities they do with dad: climbing trees, swinging a hammer, headlocking. It's all gross motor skills. So you literally get different aspects of physical development from mom and dad. And then as they age, it just gets more and more important, especially for boys, to have that regulatory factor of dad in their life when it comes to channeling their sexual and physical aggression in ways that moms simply are not able to offer. There is no way to swap out mother or father. Not a butch woman, not an effeminate man will be able to offer the kinds of developmental benefits that children get from an actual female parent and an actual male parent. That's just You can call it God's design. You can call it evolutionary mandate. This is simply how human children are wired and what they need. And no amount of repeating love makes a family. No Supreme Court justice ruling is ever going to change this. We either recognize who children are and what they need, or we victimize them. Those are the only two options.
What are your thoughts about, I know since 2015, 2015 and the redefinition of marriage by the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, what are your thoughts about the possibility? I think everybody has just kind of resigned themselves to believe, well, that will never, I mean, maybe in 50 years, like Roe v. Wade or something, but probably that's here to stay. But on the basis of what you're talking about, and not on the basis of, just set aside the basis of what is right or wrong from a biblical worldview perspective or whatever, but just on the basis of what is good for children. And do you see do you think that it's possible that could be overturned as we've both in a sense learned more? But I think the evidence was there in 2015 as well, but just ignored. But as it's more on the forefront, more on the front burner, the public opinion is maybe shifted around some of that. What are your thoughts about that possibly being changed down the road back to a male and female in marriage?
How convenient of you to ask. I just submitted an op-ed to Newsweek yesterday making this exact argument. So Idaho has passed, their House of Representatives has passed a challenge to Obergefell. It's not binding. It's just saying, hey, get off our lawn. You don't have the authority to make state decisions about the definition of marriage. And your decision was wrong. So if it passes the Senate, they will then deliver it to the Supreme Court and just sort of register their dissent. And of course, everyone's freaking out. Oh my gosh, marriage is under attack. Gay marriage is under attack, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, hey, Idaho is challenging this based on a states' rights issue. But every state should challenge Obergefell based on a children's rights issue. And then I go through all of the evidence that we had. You know, we were the 17th country to legalize gay marriage. The other 16, none of them legalized gay marriage and strengthened children's relationship claim or right to their mother and father. And since then, there's now 38 countries that have legalized gay marriage. All of them have eroded the right children have to their mother and father. So it's just making the very obvious case that even though gay marriage was advanced in the name of this has nothing to do with kids, it is incompatible with recognizing that mothers and fathers are critical to child well-being. And then I take some time and sort of deconstruct that supposed consensus that children with two moms or two dads fared no different, because now we've got 79 studies that show that they fare no different or even better than kids raised by heterosexual couples, and kind of talk about the methodological problems in those studies, how one small data set was actually responsible for 30 of those studies, and that it's pretty rare for any social science consensus to reverse in 10 years, but that's what happened. You know, in 2005, generally all of the major researchers were like, kids benefit from their married biological mother and father. 10 years later, you had this massive consensus going, actually, it doesn't matter if it's two men or two women. So something's going on there. And what's going on is massive bias and corruption within the institutions. So, you know, my case is just what we've talked about here. Children are advantaged when they are raised by their married biological mother and father, both in terms of it is the place where they are most likely to be safe. Those are the people that invest the most in them in terms of time and money and protection. Those are the two people that maximize the child's development. Those are the two people that grant children their biological identity. These things are true regardless of how you categorize marriage. So we need to get back to the place where we are recognizing that this is actually an institution that has been responsible for the greatest amount of child flourishing throughout civilization. So how likely is it to happen? I don't know. But what I will say is, even a year ago, I think that the trans madness felt inevitable. We all thought this is a train that's just going to keep rolling in and blow past station after station after station. You know, they're going to continue to obliterate Title IX, men and women's sports, men and female prisons. And honestly, over the last couple of weeks, it's come to a grinding halt. Now, I think also gay marriage has felt inevitable, or the redefinition of marriage has felt inevitable. But even from 2022 to 2024, we saw a drop in support for gay marriage nationally, especially among conservatives. At the height, 55% of Republicans agreed with gay marriage. And then in 2024, it dropped to 40%. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when you are making policy, when you are shaping your culture around something that rejects biological reality, and I would say abortion falls into this category as well, it is like a beach ball. You can hold it under the water for only so long, but then it's going to reemerge with force. Now, do I think that the culture is ready to consider overturning Obergefell? No. But I do think that a re-embrace of biological reality is always going to redound to the benefit of arguing on behalf of children's right and need for their own mother and father, raising them in a married home. We also have some resources for policymakers if they're interested in trying to carve back some of the ground that we've lost in the marriage debate. So if that's you, or if you know somebody who is in a state legislature who wants to do that, you should email us at thembeforeus.com, us at thembeforeus.com. We do think that we can take back some of this lost marriage ground. It does need to be on the basis of defending children's fundamental rights, not because marriage is a sacred institution, not because the cake baker and the florist. Those don't really land with the general public, and they don't stir hearts. And honestly, it does not strike at the historical public purpose of marriage to begin with. So we do have a plan to work to reclaim marriage on behalf of children. So if that's something you're interested in, you can
That's
email
great.
us.
And you mentioned earlier, I just want to come back to this for those who may be listening that either own their own businesses, that have companies, or you're involved in an organization like whether it's Pinnacle Forum or there's a bunch of Christian business owners organizations out there nationally. I think it's definitely worth taking a look at what you have on your website for companies. Can you just come back to that one more time and kind of explain that a little bit for people who may be in that, may be business owners?
Yeah. We've, had a hand in coaching several Christian organizations on how to tailor their HR guidance and their personnel policies. We've done webinars for the Christian Employer Alliance. Just let us coach you or offer resources, whatever it is that you need. But mainly, there's just a lot of things that even Christian organizations are funding or supporting that victimize kids, and you might not even know it. And there's things that you could actually do to support children, families, family integrity, and the health of your employees that are going to be good for them, that don't victimize kids. So go to thembeforeus.com, click on resources, drop down to resources for corporations and companies. You can download our materials for free. And then we've got people that can walk through any questions you have, lead a webinar for, your main HR or your C-suite or whoever it is that you want to bring on board with this process. But if you are a Christian organization or a values-based company, or if you want to be known as the company that doesn't just provide a great product, but puts kids first, we will tell you exactly how to do that.
That's awesome. And with that would touch the area of potentially of insurance as well as retirement fund. Because all of that has its tentacles in some wild places that Christians aren't even aware of in most cases.
Yeah. And we are going to tell you not just how to scale your HR benefits, but how to create an off-ramp if needed from your current insurance provider, depending on the size of your business, the different options that you have. So we're here to practically help you make that move in whatever way is best for your company.
I wanted to come back again to when you were talking about the curriculum for churches, which again, what a gift to churches. And I definitely want to be promoting that more as I'm going out and speaking and teaching at churches as well, and making sure that they have that, they know about it, and hopefully will be using it as a resource. But so I would imagine that one of the most difficult areas in that curriculum would be the discussion around IVF. And maybe there's some other hot button topics as well. But I just, until reading your book, Them Before Us, a few years ago, I didn't even really know much about IVF. I would hear people pray and give praise to to the Lord about how their daughter is now having a baby and went through this and I'm just thinking, I mean, I was so clueless about it, what the process was, what the ramifications were for other. If we believe that life begins at conception, then what the ramifications are for these embryos that are not being utilized or are being dumped in the garbage or are being used for research or whatever. So do you find that topic, IVF, to be the most kind of challenging or difficult within the Christian community? And are there others that are kind of up there on par with that?
That's probably the area where there is the most moral confusion, because we love babies and we know kids created through IVF and we love those kids and we're so grateful that they're alive. The problem with IVF is those babies are a fraction of the lab-made embryos that are created through big fertility. So the vast majority of children that are made in vitro, through IVF, that are created in glass, are going to be discarded. They're going to be sex selected out of existence. They're going to be graded out of existence. They're going to be deemed genetically unworthy and experimented on. And then the ones that are desirable, the right sex, that don't have any genetic abnormalities, that are not implanted, are going to be frozen. And if you go into a freezer, you very often never come out again. We don't actually know how many children are in frozen storage. I think the last sort of official number from many years ago was 1 million. But at the rate that we are creating babies, we're probably closer to like 5 to 10 million embryos. Some facilities would say that 20 to 40% have been abandoned. Nobody's paying the storage fee. They can't contact the commissioning parents anymore. And so we've got like vats and vats of abandoned orphans in frozen storage across the country. The children who are the wrong sex or genetically defect in some way, according to the commissioning parents, are donated to research so that they can improve fertility procedures in the future. So you're destroying little lives so you can make better designer little lives in the future. So when you look at the gauntlet that these lab created babies have to undergo to even make it into implantation, and then IVF pregnancies are high risk pregnancies. And so there's a high failure rate. If they are implanted successfully, they're much more likely to be premature or have other health issues that go along with it. So the babies that do make it through the process alive are 2 to 7%. 7 is a generous estimate, but it's probably around 2 to 3% of babies that start in the petri dish that are going to be born alive. So we think about IVF as being about babies, but it's really about on-demand, designer, disposable babies, very often shipped worldwide, across the globe.
Wow. And when you and I spoke the last time...
let me just pause and say, yes, that one is very hard for Christians to stomach because they don't know anything about it, or they know very little about it, or they've looked at it from the perspective of, we love our infertile friends and we want them to have a baby, which obviously is a very human response. But the Christian response is not empathy for adults. The Christian response needs to be protection for children. You and I were talking about before we started this, Amy Carmichael, we remember her because she took child protection to a level that India had never seen before. And she did it because she was a Christian. And the event that you and I met at just a couple weeks ago, where John Stonestreet was speaking, he said he couldn't think of a situation where Christianity went into a culture and child well-being didn't improve. Child protection is part and parcel of the Christian life. If you are going into a realm and children's lives are not improving, whether it's your own family, whether it's the culture at large, whether it's the kind of causes that you contribute to, you're probably not doing real Christianity. This is just what Christianity entails. I will also say that the other place where Christians stumble is when we talk about divorce, because unfortunately, divorce has received very little scrutiny or pushback within the church. And that low level of resistance truly paved the way for same-sex marriage. So unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians who have been implicated in the cultural lies about divorce, that it's no big deal. I had a woman on Twitter DM me and say, my parents were Christians. but they had a struggling marriage. And my mom started reading things from a Christian organization that talked about how you can make blended families work. And she's like, well, I guess I can do this then. Like there just has not been enough of a full-throated denunciation of casual divorce, which is about 70% of divorces these days, and the drastic impact it has on children's physical, mental, emotional, academic, and relational health. So there certainly is. I mean, I tell people, give me enough time and I'll piss you off too. But in terms of the Christian world, IVF and divorce are probably the places where we get the most pushback.
Yeah, and when you think about even so what we're talking about right now, this idea where it becomes challenging for Christians who have a family member or a loved one who they long to see have a baby. Understand that. Again, compassion. But also, I think it's particularly challenging when you have someone in your family who's had a baby by IVF. And it starts, I think part of the challenge is it feels like, how can I not support this in a full-throated way? And it feels like I'm even denying the life or saying somehow my granddaughter or grandson shouldn't have been born. Of course, that's not what we're saying. But I think you've outlined that clearly enough. But it's not. It's different, but yet it's still of the same ilk in a sense that my gay son or my gay daughter or my loved one who's in the LGBT world. And at one time I was firmly planted in what the scriptures taught, but now that it's in my face and now that I know somebody who's wrestling with those issues or as identifying that way, and I love them and care about them, it doesn't take long for our emotions to get involved in something where we begin to compromise because what we thought we were anchored to, actually, we weren't anchored all that well. It was just not inconvenient to believe what the Bible teaches. Now it's hard, it's inconvenient, it's emotional challenge, it's disruptive in my family. And there's a lot of things, whether it's LGBT, whether it's IVF, whether it's divorce or whatever, there's a lot of things that get challenged and we start to compromise and shift more toward a cultural viewpoint on those things.
God says, I recognize the kind of pull that the people in your inner circle will have on your doctrine, and you must guard against it. This is a problem this is a human temptation, right? This isn't because you're special. This is because you're human. All humans are going to start to compromise when it kind of seeps into their own world, primarily the choices that they're making, like the famous Bible teacher, who had the kid who, was like zealous for the Lord and memorizing scripture. And he comes back from college and he goes, gosh, I'm just really questioning my faith. And he goes, oh, who are you sleeping with, right? That very often, like our own compromise is then going to call into question our doctrine. But next to that is somebody that's in our immediate world who is struggling with that issue, who calls into question our doctrine. So I love unity. I want to prioritize the relationship. It can never be above the truth. So we have a challenge to walk with our friends who are in struggling marriages, to walk with our friends dealing with infertility, to walk with our friends who experience same-sex attraction, to walk with our friends who have unwanted singleness and desperately want to be a mom or dad. They deserve our empathy and our love, and they have a burden that we need to bear, but never at the expense of victimizing a child. That, Christian, is your primary allegiance. Your allegiance is to child protection, not the feelings of your friends. So that's something that we need to get straight. Otherwise, we are going to be in jeopardy of the people that are facilitating child victimization. And that gets very close to like millstone around your neck territory.
And of course, the severity of how we need to deal with, we need to get serious about not playing with sin. We need to get serious about not toying with the stuff and flirting around the edges because it eventually sucks us in if we are not paying close attention to it. So I'm also reminded of, I'm going through Nancy Pearcey's book, The Toxic War on Masculinity. And in it, she's amazing. And in it,
I blurbed it. I was like, what do you want me to say, Nancy? You may talk about this from an activist perspective or a mom perspective, because like I'm like all on board with this.
It's incredible. And one of the things she highlights in the section I'm going through right now, which I'm not that deep into it, is how we hear all the time about the patriarchy or even complementarity being such a horrible thing, and the Christian men, you see headlines and news clips about how Christian men or the idea of male-female perspectives within the Bible or whatever sets women back, hundreds of years. But what she points out is the data shows, and this is very interesting, the data shows that men, fathers, husbands who are mediocre Christians are worse
Yes.
in terms of abuse, in terms of
Yeah.
divorce, in
Yep.
terms of all of the negative
Yep.
things. They are worse than
Yep.
secular men, but so
Yeah.
often it gets lumped into this idea that all Christian men are typical, or the majority of Christian men are that way.
Right.
But when you separate those who are simply kind of floating through whether they have a genuine faith or it's just a carnal baby faith or whatever, those men tend to be a huge risk factor on a number of fronts. But for those who are really committed and they're going to church regularly and they are leaning into their faith and they're allowing God to change them, those men are radically better than obviously the religious guys or secular men, and also their wives report a much higher level of satisfaction than the average population of women. So it's interesting to see those two things separated out and credit being given, which makes sense, that guys who are leaning into their faith, men who are really wanting to be formed and transformed by Jesus, would be those kinds of men.
Yeah. So the explanation of that is the nominal Christian man has just enough information about the Bible to say, I have power over this marriage. I can do whatever I want with it. Whereas the formed Christian man has a lot of information about his role as head and the understanding that means service, provision, and protection, right? So like you can't just pull a little aspect of the Christian world out and then say, boom, ding, done. No, you actually need to get serious about discipleship and spiritual formation. And if you do, you have the happiest, safest, like arguably most economically prosperous families in the country.
Absolutely. So I'm super excited. I get to actually share on stage with Nancy Pearcey in a few weeks. I know, so crazy. I know.
So great.
So I'm just wondering, Katy, if there's anything else as we're getting toward our time here of wrapping up, whether there's just something you feel kind of prompted in your spirit or just something that you haven't been able to kind of share yet, anything you'd like to kind of wrap up with our audience on.
Well, just that we'd love for you to follow our work. Come to thembeforeus.com and subscribe. We have a lot of plans for 2025. We're really going to try to equip state level lawmakers in areas where they can start to proactively defend children's rights. We've spent so much time being reactive and defensive, and I hate that. I'm like, I want to go on offense. I want to start protecting kids, not just battling back bad bills. I want to advance good bills. So we're going to start doing that. We'd love for you to follow our work. There's been lots and lots of requests for us to produce materials for teens. So we're thinking about creative ways to do that next year. This year, hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to have some exciting resources for teens specifically. And that kind of like blends my two passions of child protection and child equipping. So to have it all in one place in some mediums that I hope are going to, not just that kids aren't going to be like, I guess I'll do this, mom, but they'll be like, oh my gosh, I love this. So working on that. We have our documentary that we're co-producing with Focus on the Family, $1 million project. We just started filming for it, and it is going to be completed this year, might be released early next year, but it is going to slay. Like, let me just talk about like how great this is. I'm so excited about it. We want it to be accessible to everybody, whether you're scrolling through Hulu. We want it to be an easy resource for our allies around the world, very often, which are like mom and pop operations, in small countries to battle back these well-funded, organized international forces that are seeking to destroy the family. So the documentary is in full force, and we just would love for you to be a part of it. So come and subscribe. Even if you're just following us on social media, let us make you experts on all of this, because nobody's going to do it other than you. Like, adults need to do it, and Christian adults specifically have a mandate to do this. So come and be a part of this, and let us make you into warriors on behalf of kids. That's awesome.
Well, and for those that are listening, I just can't encourage you enough. I hope everybody goes over to Them Before Us, that you connect with them through their website, and that you really seriously consider supporting their work. Obviously, what they're doing is vital. It's critical. It's essential for our time. And I love what you're talking about, Katy, in terms of getting on the offense. Clearly, 2024 was you guys God dumped some rocket fuel, into the organization, and I feel like that's part of what's happening for us at the end of 2024 and into 2025. But I really can't encourage enough people to get involved in what you're doing, and also just quickly the idea of being an expert. Some people might hear that word and feel like, oh my gosh, that's going to just require gobs. You don't have to have a PhD. What in reading some of their books, in getting connected with them on social media, getting to their website, you can become adept at so many of these issues and topics just by staying connected with them a bit, leaning in, doing some reading. They're going to equip you in a very short period of time to really be head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of the knowledge base that you have and the ability to communicate that in a way that really draws people into the conversation, and you will have a kind of authority that I think is essential for speaking into these issues. So, Katy, thank you so much for being here. We love you, love your work, and one of these days we're going to get a chance to meet your family. You met mine, but I'd love to meet your family at some point. So, yeah, bless you. And for everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. We're grateful that you were here, and I hope that you've been blessed by this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or view future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. You may also subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Google Music. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a future episode.